low, intermediate, and high. While these three words sound like the settings on a blender, in the world of education, they mean so much more. These are the names of the different tracks that students in the U.S. are commonly placed on based off of their academic performance. Soon we will take a deeper look at what those tracks entail, but first let me explain tracking so you can better understand its role in schools. Education Week explains tracking as the most commonly used term for ability grouping, the practice of lumping children together according to their talents in the classroom. The documentary, Waiting for Superman, explains another side to tracking in the United States.
Many families and their children are unaware that their academic future will be decided by a school official who will place them on a track. Tracking is often determined by test results, but research shows that students are also tracked by arbitrary or subjective factors like neatness, politeness, and obedience to authority. Lower tracks have lower expectations and often worse teachers. So students placed on lower tracks often find they are running fast, but falling behind.
The very idea of tracking remains to be a hot topic issue. Sociologist Adam Gamarin writes, although theoretically tracking allows schools to tailor the curriculum to students' needs, a large literature has found that tracking contributes to educational inequality. This short informational piece will compare tracking in U.S. schools with the way schools are tracked in Europe. I recently traveled to Europe and was able to visit a number of schools and looked in depth at their tracking practices. Please note that Europe should not be regarded as a singular country or way of doing things. I will refer to specific countries when discussing some of Europe's tracking systems. My hope is that this piece will make you think about tracking and the implications it creates for students. After watching this video, you will be able to recognize the similarities and differences between tracking in the United States as well as parts of Europe. You will then be able to decide how you feel about both systems for yourself. Listen to Tom Lovelace, a former 6th grade teacher and Harvard policy professor, explain the role that ability grouping can play in schools and why teachers might continue to use them.
We have surveys from teachers, and teachers say that they are finding it quite difficult to instruct classes of kids because of the wide range of abilities that they're faced with in the classroom. And ability grouping is one of the tools that they used to reduce the heterogeneity of abilities in the classroom and to create groups that are more easily to instruct.
We are not the only country to use tracking as a way to separate students in the classroom. In Europe, tracking is based on ability, just like in the United States. However, tracking is much more explicit with clear dividing lines. Ghent University in Belgium describes this type of tracking as between-school tracking, where students are assigned to different schools on the basis of their prior achievement. While in Europe, I spoke with a middle school principal in Luxembourg who said that class structures are much more fragile than the class system in the U.S. Because of this, there is a strong need and a clear request for specific jobs. There is also more competition within the school systems in order to get the better jobs. He added that schools create a balance for career options. There is competition within the country as well as competition within surrounding countries. And to that he added, sometimes we have to be better than our neighbors to stand a chance. This type of thinking is normal for the small European country that must compete in order to survive. In Luxembourg, there are 5,000 new students enrolled in the Luxembourg school system each year. As early as the age of 10 and by age 12, these students have gone through an orientation cycle, similar to middle school in the U.S. A child's future is decided upon here based on test scores, an advisory decision from the student's teachers in consultation with parents, although parents and students do not have much say in this choice. Students are then placed on one of these three tracks: classical, technical, or vocational. Classical refers to attending a university for a traditional degree. Technical refers to a 2-year specialized school with careers such as administrative assistant, nurse's aide, and bank clerks. Lastly, there's vocational. This refers to career examples such as mechanic, beautician, agriculturalist, or carpenter. After middle school, students in Luxembourg will attend one of the 3 schools mentioned above. These schools are physically separate of each other and make a more visible segregation of students. At the same time, students within these individual schools will attend classes and spend time with the students who are on the same track as them. What are the pros and cons you can see with this method? As you can see, this form of tracking is clear in its distinction. Everyone starts in the same place and then ends up in one of the 3 final destinations: classical, technical, or vocational. Conversely, in the United States, tracking is done in a more transparent and less obvious way. Students are still grouped by ability, however, they remain in the same school with the same students. Ghent University calls this within-school tracking, in which relatively heterogeneous groups of students within a school are assigned to different streams within that school on the basis of their prior achievement. In the United States, there are also 3 types of tracking. However, they are not based on the type of school they will attend, but instead, which classes. These 3 tracking groups are simply categorized as low, intermediate, and high. This means that students of all abilities socialize and attend school in the same building. What kind of implications do you think this will have for low ability students? What about the intermediate or the high students? Oftentimes, students are sorted into groups based off of their ability levels and work with peers who are at their same level. Dr. Jeannie Oakes of the Ford Foundation has reason to believe that ability or achievement grouping isn't all it's cracked up to be.
Grouping by achievement is a very complex and imprecise practice that we seem to have a great deal of confidence in as an efficient way to handle individual differences in learning settings. It turns out that there's very little evidence that that theory is effective in the way we practice it in schools.
As we move toward a more inclusive learning environment, there is more and more mixing of these ability groups, creating what is called heterogeneous groups. These heterogeneous groups come with a level of controversy of their own. Some teachers believe that heterogeneous groups tend to slow down the pace of students on a higher track when they work with students who are considered to be lower.
Heterogeneous grouping in some ways is a misnomer because homogeneous grouping probably really isn't real. I mean, the only way that I could group a kid and say that I'm grouping them and they're all the same is if they need a particular skill or strategy. Other than that, everybody's really different. I mean, every reader's different. They bring different schema, different cultural experiences to each page. If I'm going to be doing homogeneous grouping, it has to be for a real specific purpose. With respect to heterogeneous grouping, as it involves or implicates race and language and culture, I would say that it's a very good thing to do. Everything has to be done in balance. If I'm going to put a kid in a group for an instructional purpose, I better have a sound reason for it. If I'm going to ask kids to get into groups based on interest, they ought to have very clear conceptions of how they view their interests given the text that I might be providing. So everyone has to be clear about what group we're going into at a particular time and why we're doing it. That's the most important thing.
Students shouldn't be separated for long periods of time in any case, and that if you had a grouping plan that you were using that caused children to be separated by performance, and that it so happened in that school that separating children by performance also separated them by ethnicity or language background or what have you, it would give you a very strong message that this is not a good thing to do.
Flexible grouping by definition means that you're not trapped in the same group all the time. I mean, that's it, period. So teachers have to monitor how kids are moving from group to group or whether they're trapped in a group. We want kids who seem to belong to certain groups by virtue of their own choice or how we put them in there. We want to break down those boundaries and move them around. So if I have a group of kids who I pulled together to do a little mini lesson on how to infer while you read and how to keep track of what you're thinking using Post-its, then I want to make sure that that kid doesn't remain in the same skills-based group day after day after day. So it's all about balance, it's all about flexibility, because the more flexibility you bring to your approach, the greater the kids learn from each other.
As you can see, both the US and Europe use tracking systems as a way to separate students by ability. Whether it is the European way of sending a student to a specific school to learn a specific skill, or by the American way of placing them in a classroom away from other peers, tracking does not appear to be going anywhere soon. So what do you think? Is there a tracking system you side with the most, the US or Europe? Do you think tracking should be discontinued everywhere? Until we have all the answers, we must all do our part to stay on track and do what's best for our students.